thank Louisa for her speech, and now to Kate Andrews to continue the case for the opposition.
Thank you very much for having me tonight. So the motion tonight is that this House believes that feminism cannot be capitalist. Cannot. No caveats, no addendums, no exception to the rule. It cannot, under any circumstance, be capitalist. So what on earth are we to make of Catherine McCormick? I don't know if you've heard of Catherine McCormick before. She was American aristocracy. People described her and her husband as being wealthier than kings and queens. She called herself a feminist. She was deeply committed to getting all women the right to vote. She was a prominent member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She was a feminist, and she was a capitalist. In the 1950s, when the United States government would not invest in research for medical contraception, and to be very clear, when the state, which the proposition is arguing we should hand over more power to because they will be in the interest of women, when the American government was not willing to invest in contraception, McCormick used her capital to almost single-handedly develop the oral contraceptive. She backed birth control, and she allowed Margaret Sanger, who is basically the founder of what we now consider to be Planned Parenthood, and the team of scientists that she had around her to develop and test the pill. This was a feminist, capitalist project made possible by this woman who, according to the proposition tonight, cannot exist. The pill was a capitalist pursuit. Are we really going to say that wasn't feminist? Is this proposition going to sweep Catherine McCormick's story under the rug so that it can defend the motion tonight? Do we really want to condemn markets and stick it to the man so badly that we would overlook the huge opportunities that capitalism and capitalists have brought to women? If we put aside the ugly modern-day aspects of feminism, like David Schwimmer offering a female journalist a chaperone so she could interview him, like kicking the grid girls out of their jobs and the rest of it, and we just go back to those fundamental roots of those first waves of feminism: equal rights, liberty, freedom, the right to vote, the right to speak, the right to do what you want to do with your own body, the right to have dissenting views, the right to be difficult, the right to earn money, then it is impossible to separate feminism from the achievements of capitalism as well. And McCormick is one, albeit a spectacular, one of a billion women who interact with capitalism. Billions of women, I should say. 1 billion people have risen out of absolute poverty over the past 30 years alone because of the market mechanisms that have come in to major countries that before kept them out. This has empowered people, this has empowered women. Countless women's lives and their children's lives and their children's children's lives and the future children that we don't even know yet haven't had to fall victim to birth rate fatalities and mortalities because of the amazing innovations in science and technology that have been made possible by capitalism and have been funded by the money that we've been able to come up with, the vast amount of wealth we've come up with in a liberal society to make things better for women. Feminism and capitalism merge, yeah?
Is it not the case that birth rate mortalities have actually been rising in the US since a lot of Obamacare hospitals have been shut down in less profitable areas?
There are major issues with access to healthcare in America. Happy to come back to that as well. But if you look across the globe and you look across the past 10, 20, 30, 100 years, this has plummeted. It used to be the case that if you were a woman and you were pregnant, that could go hand in hand with a death sentence. Thank goodness that in developed countries now that have access to modern medicine, including the US, despite its issues around healthcare, that is simply no longer the case, thanks to liberalism, thanks to capitalism. Feminism and capitalism merge billions of times a day when women as individuals make choices, whether that be where to work or what to buy. Women are empowered. As living standards rise, women rise up too. Free market trade and interaction lifts us all. And the world is very far from being perfect, especially for women, but we are seeing countries move in the right direction. Tasman referenced the factories that women work in for basically nothing compared to what we have here today. And that is true, and that is a sad reality. But it is acknowledged by economists on the left and the right that that is one of the stepping stones to getting towards a completely modernized free market and innovative economy. It is not to say that we should be happy about that. As consumers, we should be aware of what we're buying. But if we shut down these factories, these people, all of them, the women included, go back into the fields where death tolls are much, much higher. Capitalism is not the entrapment, it is the way out of poverty. It is the place where women can escape poverty and make more demands around personal, political, societal, and cultural freedoms. And with that freedom comes choice. So let's get into some gender pay gap debunking here, because we've heard from the proposition twice now that a major reason to oppose capitalism is specifically because of the gender pay gap. And I heard some pretty faulty statistics bandied around. 17% gender pay gap in the UK is deeply misleading. That combines full-time work with part-time work. You can't compare those two things together. The more accurate statistic is now around 8%. It is basically the lowest it's ever been on record, and that's for full-time work. For women in part-time work, it's -4%, roughly -5%. It's somewhere in there. I can't remember the exact figure. Women on average in part-time work earn more. And the reason that the gender pay gap is such a faulty measure to weigh up capitalism on is because these statistics aren't measuring anything comparable. They're not measuring job, age, education, background. They're not measuring anything like for like. If you look at the gender pay gap statistics, in many cases they are worse than useless, because they actually would incentivize companies in many situations, say if you're an airline, to hire fewer women into lower paid jobs in order to sort out your gender pay gap. Feudalism, for example, would be a fantastic way to close the gender pay gap. When women and men are forced to do the exact same kind of work, usually labor-intensive work, you find there's not very much inequality. But as we get richer, as we embrace capitalism, as women have more choices about what they do and where they do it, we see those changes increase. And if you do choose to take time out of the workforce, if you choose to go down the motherhood lane, then taking time out of the workforce obviously has implications for your future earnings. Now, I'm not saying that we should just be totally okay with that. I'd like to advocate for change. It's ridiculous that in the UK, paternity pay and maternity pay are in line with each other. It's all great to have shared parental leave, but men can't take it up if they're not going to get paid nearly anything when they do it. But we need to be campaigning for pragmatic changes that are operating in a system that have benefited women. We shouldn't be campaigning for changes that would overthrow us. My question to the proposition is, to what? And I'll come to that in a second. If feminism isn't capitalist, then what exactly is it? Because the alternatives, as I'll discuss in a moment, aren't so good. So there's plenty we can do to help women. And you don't have to like every policy that comes out of Whitehall to think that capitalism still hasn't been good for women. We can look to other areas of the world. You can look to Denmark, look to their childcare policies, look to Sweden, look to their generous shared parental leave. Because if you look to those countries in Scandinavia, you are looking at very capitalist countries. They invest, they redistribute, yes, but they're extremely free market. I would love to debate the proposition about which female-oriented policies we should be adopting from these other countries. Thankfully, we have so many developed countries to look at because most countries have seen the good sense in creating a foundation based on private property and rights and principles in capitalism, which has made us so much more successful. But I'm not willing to pretend. I think it's very disingenuous to brand these countries as anything other than capitalism. In Scandinavia, they don't have a national minimum wage. They have lots of market-based healthcare provisions. They have school choice in Sweden. They have comparatively low corporation tax. These are not socialist utopias, these are capitalist countries. Let's look to them, learn from their forms of capitalism, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And let's dare for a moment, and only for a moment because it's ugly, to consider broadly what the difference would be between feminism in a capitalist society and the catastrophic attempts at the alternatives over the years. There's practically no indicator of human well-being that favors the likes of the Soviet Union or Mao's China, or is very concerned to hear about East Germany or Venezuela today. I've seen some truly horrifying attempts, actually, where people pretend that because the Soviet Union and Mao had free childcare and access to laundry services, that they were good to women. These are countries that under socialist rule failed to give women even the most basic feminine products like sanitary products. These are countries that inflicted mass rape in gulags and executions for political dissent. Think about that. Executions for political dissent. What were the women of the 1900s campaigning for if it wasn't for women to have a political voice? You want to live as a woman in East Germany? You want to talk about equality in East Germany? Financial equality, sure, they didn't have very much. You want to talk about equality compared to West Germany, their lifespan was significantly shorter. Their opportunities were bleak. Women couldn't come and go from East Germany. What is feminist about not being able to control your own movements? This is not some kind of utopia for feminism. These are the stark realities of what happens when you take a system that offers individualism, opportunity, wealth, and a way forward, and you butcher it. And I think it's motions like tonight that hurt feminism more broadly. Fewer than 1 in 5 women in the UK and the US identify as feminist, some studies suggest. There are some more generous ones, but they're not particularly generous. There's a fairly recent one in the UK that about 1 in 3 women identify as feminists. It's not popular. The proposition is mentioned you can just throw out every conservative center-right person, get rid of those centrists too, you'll actually get more support. No, no, no. Feminists are having to climb their way up. There is not a lot of support out there. And it's motions like this that turn people off, because if you're feminist, you can't be a capitalist. If you're feminist, you can't vote right-wing. If you're feminist, you can't have supported Brexit. If you're a feminist, you can't ask questions about a statistic that you saw this one time that you think might be faulty. Because if you don't fit into our very, very narrow orthodoxy of what it means to be a feminist, you are not in the club. You want to rule out capitalists from the feminist category? Best of luck to you and the genuine efforts that you might have to make this world a better place for women, because you will be on your own. Something I like to think about when I go to work in the morning in Westminster is the statue that I see in front of me. It's Millicent Fawcett. She is the first woman, the only woman to have a statue in Parliament, and a lot was made out of this because she was put up for the 100th year anniversary of some women getting the right to vote, not all women getting the right to vote. And she was put up in effort with the Fawcett Society that also bandied about very faulty statistics on the gender pay gap. And she was put up because she's supposed to, for many people, represent a woman who, would have hated what she saw today. She'd be disgusted. She wanted feminism. She wanted equality. Well, she would have been deeply offended by what she saw today, but not for the reason that many people think. She was a free market capitalist. She was one of the most famous suffragettes, and she believed in capitalism. She actually had a very successful economics book called Political Economy for Beginners. And she believed in classical liberalism and individualism and the role of markets. So she would be terrified by what she saw today. And I'm very grateful that we've put her up in Parliament Square, because individualism at the crux of everything is how we decide if people are entering into something voluntarily. If you want to know if a woman is being treated well, if the situation that she's in, if her partner, if her life, if her children, if her job, if all of it's okay, you have to give her choice, you have to give her a voice, and you have to give her autonomy. And it is through markets, it's through liberalism, and it's through a system of capitalism that women have been able to achieve this at a fairly rapid pace, actually, since we've been bringing it in so quickly. So I'm excited to hear from you guys as to what you think of this motion tonight, but for me, the idea that capitalism and feminism are one is quite literally set in stone in Parliament Square. Thank you very much.